The title here is Nitrogen, an important nutrient to our water quality challenge, but I think phosphorus is also important. But as Sean said, we're doing a pretty good job in the state with phosphorus, because if you keep the soil there, and I'm really passionate about conservation, we've no-tilled for many years, as John said, keep the soil there, you can keep the phosphorus on the field where it belongs. Nitrogen's a whole different nutrient to work with, so that's where I'm kind of focusing on. We have a lot more concerns with nitrogen and what we have to do, and as John also said, there's no silver bullet. There's a lot of things we can try, and we all do our part, because we have a responsibility to keep the nitrates on the field, keep them out of the rivers and streams that end up in the Gulf of Mexico and give us that hypoxia problem. And as you see here, the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, a couple of the speakers have talked about that, but Gene and I have a kindergarten teacher friend that always told us you had to repeat everything 27 times to get it imprinted on your brain. So here, we've got 3 or 4 times here today already, so hopefully we're getting it. I'll go through these a little bit fast because I know we're running out of time, and John would like to have some time for questions afterwards. These are some of the things, as you saw before, that you can do to help reduce the nitrogen from getting into water and keep it on your land, but most of them are in that 0 to 10% range. We do split applications of nitrogen, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and do a couple of these things, but some of the big things is what I'm going to talk about, because they're something that are a little more newer to farming practices, and probably many of you that are farmers are doing one or several of these in-field practices. Here you get into some of the ones that give you a little higher percentage of nitrogen or the nitrates removed. Land use like perennial crops. I talked to somebody who does miscanthus, and the first year it's probably has at least as high nitrates in the tile water as corn does, but by the 3rd or 4th year it's down really, really low. So that's one possibility. And over near Iowa City, they have a miscanthus energy project where they're raising it to mix with the coal in the boilers at Iowa, at the University of Iowa there. So that's one project that's kind of up in our area. Of course, land retirement, CRP. There's a lot of CRP acres in the state. And then we get down to the bioreactor, which I'll talk about later. We also have buffers around our streams, but they only take the surface water or the runoff, and so there's not a lot of nitrates in that usually. So once it gets in the tile water, there's only a couple of things you can do to reduce it. One of them, saturated buffer, like John talked about, and a bioreactor, like I'm going to talk about later. So perennial vegetation, there could be pasture or alfalfa or whatever, but in our case, without a cow herd anymore, we have some grounds in the CRP, and of course the left is a food plot where we have the deer have eaten all the corn, and there's some foxtail and some other small seeded things there for the pheasants and the other game birds. So cover crops, we'll talk about that a little bit. We started 7 years ago with 10 acres and 3.5 acre strips just to see what it was like, and we've increased our acres ever since, and my plan is to hit every acre this coming fall. We didn't quite make it this last fall, but we're gearing up to get every acre covered. We're really sold on them and what they can do, and bridging over that area, the part of the year where there's nothing growing, in a corn soybean rotation, and they can pull up those nitrates from the soil and sequester them and then release them later on the season for your crop use. This was one of the early years. This is about 4 years ago, I think. It was oats we had flown on. We started flying them on 7 years ago. This was oats and radish, I believe, into standing beans. You see it's about 6 inches tall when I combined the beans. I actually just jumped off the combine. It was that day I combined them. And this is after I combined. You can see I clipped off the top of the oats, and there's a turnip over there, or a radish over there, if you can see. If I can get this thing in the lower left-hand corner. This is in standing corn where we flew it in. This is from about 4 years ago too. This is what it looked like about the time we started harvesting. We seemed to get a little, this was rye, cereal rye. We seemed to get a little better stand. We did when we were flying it into corn rather than beans. And I think a couple of reasons, maybe some of the bean herbicides possibly hurt a little bit the growth of the rye, but for the most part, we were flying this on at brown silken corn, and there's still quite a bit of sunlight getting through there, as you can see in that picture, and that would help the rye to get a good start. In beans, we would fly it on about the first time we saw some yellow leaves showing up, and those leaves kind of matted over, so they didn't get as much of that sunlight down in the seed and the early growth of the rye, so a little slower growing in the beans. This was, well, in that same field just right beside where we harvested, so you can see it's got a good growth there, and that particular year I know it stayed green into January, and in the spring it just took right off again. We've gone to, in the last couple of years, well, we had a year about 3 years ago when we flew on about 600 acres worth, and it didn't rain like for 5 weeks, and so I wrote a $20,000 check to the airplane guy for his flying on the seed and the seed, and got pretty much nothing, maybe a 2 or 3% stand. So that's when I decided to go out and buy a drill. So there's more than one way to do it. There's other guys. We've got a friend over a county over east of it who's interseeds with a Hagee, goes into standing crops. That's one way, and there's all kinds of innovation going on with interseeding of cover crops, and so you can fly them on. If you get rain, you're in great shape. You can put an interseed. You can drill like I do. We're just trying to follow the combine with the drill, so we're getting out there right after harvest. This was in 7.5-inch rows with the Great Plains drill, and so you can see that it's just coming through up there. It's a couple inches tall there, and this was just probably a couple weeks after I seeded it. And we have enough manure to treat. We've changed and lowered our manure rate in the fall. As I talked about our split application, we just put about 3,000 to 3,200 acres on in the fall, injected with no-till coolers. And then we go in the spring, we put some on the planter, and then oftentimes side dress a little bit too. So our split application is one way we're trying to not dump everything on at once and have that big nitrate load all at one time. So this was, we planted seeded the cereal rye, and this was, I think maybe a couple weeks later we put on our manure, and this was maybe a couple weeks later where I took the picture. But as you can see, the manure tank and the coolers don't really bother the rye too much. In fact, by spring that'll be a solid green mass. Cereal rye, the advantage of it tillers, and then it just turns everything's green. So by spring you won't be able to tell where those no-till coolers from our manure tank went. And this is what it looked like in the spring. This actually is a field that's going to soybeans. I let it grow a little taller. Corn, I usually try to terminate it a couple of weeks before planting, 12 days to 2 weeks before planting, and it's usually around 8 to 10 inches tall. Beans, I'll let it go right up to planting, or even a day after, a day before, just whenever I happen to hit it. So there seems to be no allelopathic effect on beans, so there's no worry about letting the rye grow taller. I'd rather have more growth, so I got more residue there, and when it's growing up above the ground 2 or 3 feet tall, it's also growing those roots deeper, and so those are doing a lot of good for me. We like to think of our rye as, I first started planting it for soil conservation reasons, but I think the soil health reasons are important too, and everything that decaying organic matter does. Also the nitrogen sequestration, which helps us too as far as keeping the nitrates out of the tile water. And this is where I was going to beans. I was spraying. You can see I have the boom up pretty high because I think the stuff was about waist high on me. So, and this is it about 8 or 10 days later. It all turns brown. This was a field I've already planted right beside my house. I have to plant with GPS because you can't really see markers in 3.5 foot tall rye. So I've learned how to do that. Probably the only one change that I've made other than what I was doing before. This is my corn planter. So you can see it wasn't as tall. The rye wasn't. It was probably 8 or 10 inches tall. It's a little bit green yet, as you can see there, but it is pretty well died down. I just jumped off the tractor and took a picture. We've got the trash whippers there to push out away a slot for the seed to go in. Then on the back we have totally tubular, where we apply nitrogen with the planter. We found out the first year we planted corn we had a little bit of a yield reduction, and we kind of came to the conclusion through talking to some researchers at Iowa State that we possibly, the rye was tying up that nitrogen and it wasn't releasing it soon enough, and so we're having a little bit of gap there. So we put 10 gallons or so of a 28 or 32% with the planter behind it, and also we have a starter that's like 3.5 gallons of 918.9. So we don't want to have any time when that corn plant is short of nitrogen, because if you have a day or two short of nitrogen, it can hurt your yield. So that's why we do that. This is soybeans and rye coming up. You can see it's a pretty solid mat of rye between the rye and the corn residue there. There's no soils getting away when you get a 3 or 4 inch rain with that kind of a stand. And this is our corn coming up into the rye, which was last year's soybean residue. There's actually a radish in there that somehow missed the herbicide application or came up later, and it's blooming at about knee high. And there's the size of the radish. Although I pulled the root off when I pulled it out, it's probably about a foot deep, so it has some compaction help there too. So but right now I'm just doing strictly cereal rye, just because of it's simpler, and we're planting right behind the planter. I think with radish or some of those other plants, you have to plant them earlier to get a better growth, and after the combine, you just don't have enough time to get that kind of growth on those. Bioreactors, that's one thing that I decided in our watershed. We have a watershed project too, and it is one of the things that can really do a lot to take the nitrates out of the tile water. And like I said, there's only a couple of things you can do. So the one thing I decided was to put in a bioreactor. So I put this in 2014. This was actually the edge of a bean field. It's right at the edge of my waterway, so I did have to take a tenth of an acre of crop out. So here's where they peeled it out. I kind of leveled off, get out the residue or the crop off the way, and it drains about 65 acres. I think the normal thinking is, from 50 to 100 acres or so is about what you want to have a bioreactor. This happens to be where it drops the water across the road. It wasn't flowing very high that day. It's a lot higher today. We build bioreactors to take the nitrates out of the water once it gets into the tile. The NRCS designed it. I had a local contractor build it. He'd been doing tiling for me for 35 years. He'd never built a bioreactor before, but he put some of these stop log in for the wetlands. So he kind of knew what he was doing there, and he did a really careful job, as you'll see as we go along. First, he had to dig a hole about 6 feet deep. I think mine was about 30 to 34 feet wide, 90 feet long. And the local NRCS guys, one that took all these pictures and the video, they were there about every day to making sure it was done right. But between the excavator and a couple of dozers, we got the hole dug. And this is where the tile was coming in. I had a 8-inch tile coming in, draining on the 75 acres. It was patterned tile, that was over a 2-year period, just the year before and the year before that. So they wanted to get the right flow, because it's going to come in on the uphill side and then sit in those wood chips for however long it takes, so the bacteria can take out the nitrates, and then goes out the other end. So there's the stop log where it goes in, and this, they set out the tile in a T shape there so the water could spread out in amongst the wood chips. There we put in several boards, so we want all of our water, if we can, to go through the bioreactor. At times you might have to pull one of those top boards out just so the water isn't standing in your field so you can get it planted. But other than that, for the most part, we try to let all the water go through the bioreactor. Because it bypasses, it doesn't have a chance to take out the nitrates. So here's our wood chips, 6.5 truckloads of wood chips. They were hardwoods at 1 to 2 inch size. These were mostly hard maple. There's a little bit of oak in there, I guess. We fortunately have a sawmill not too far away down by Ollie, Hammis Brothers Sawmill, and they had a really good quality wood chips, and so spread those out. They're about 4 feet deep, 4.5 feet deep for the wood chips. And he packed them down good, drove over and packed them down, but get them spread pretty evenly. This was done in July of 2014, so the weather was good, and it's a good time to get a contractor if you want to put a bioreactor in, because they're not quite so busy putting in tile like they are the rest in the spring and the fall. So if you can get your spot picked out ahead of time, that's probably a good idea. And then a geotextile fabric that goes over the wood chips, which is just mainly to keep the soil particles and the silt from getting down into the wood chips. I want to keep the wood chips just wood chips so they can do their job of taking out the nitrates. So then they covered it up with dirt about 2.5 feet and kind of mounted it a little higher in the middle. So we've got a lot of soil on top of it, and as I'll show you later, I seeded it down to a pollinator mix so that we've got some wildflowers and things like that growing there. So hopefully we've got some added benefits of maybe monarch butterflies and bees and those kind of things. So. Finishing up here, I got a little ahead of myself on the talk because I'm trying to talk fast to make it go faster, but it didn't work, did it, John? It was about 2 weeks. And they were chipping the wood chips about as fast as they go, so we were only able to get, by the time they got there with the wood chips, they also are the supplier for the Farm Progress Show for wood chips, and they were taking a semi-load up there and a semi-load in my place, so we're getting like one a day. So it took me like almost a week just to get the wood chips in. So you've seen this one before, how the water goes in and into wood chips, and the bacteria takes the nitrates out and takes that as nitrogen gas. And you've seen this picture or two before, so maybe it's getting imprinted on your brain here. This was my pollinator seeding that I put on top, so we got a few wildflowers there, and hopefully get some benefit out of that too. These are the results, maybe a little small to see in the back of the room, but over a 2-year period, we've had a 64% reduction in nitrates. And that's kind of the key for me, it's doing the job.